Welcome to Ancient Greece Today. My name is Naomi. I'm a professor of classics at Harvard University, and I am your host for this podcast series, which brings together scholars and artists to think about the ancient Greek world and its afterlives. Each episode, we first look at a piece of ancient Greek literature and then at an example of how it's been used and reimagined in the present day. This season is Tragedy Today. We have talked about plays by Aeschylus and Sophocles, and now we're focusing on Euripides. Last episode, we discussed Euripides' Medea. Today, we're looking at the Bacchae, a very different play, which Euripides wrote at the end of his life. It was produced posthumously in 405 BCE. How is the Bacchae very different? We discussed last episode how Medea traverses the divide between human and divine, but this tragedy has an Olympian god as its main character, Dionysus himself. And one way to understand it is as a very traditional play, one about the dangers of defying a divinity, in this case, the god of theatre itself. But the Bacchae is also much more than that, as we shall see, and it has prompted an incredibly rich variety of adaptations and reworkings across different media. I have two guests today to explore this play with me. First, Dr. Lucy Jackson, Associate Professor of Classics at Durham University, and then Monica Youn, poet, lawyer, and Professor of English at UC Irvine. Monica will give a reading of her poem, Study of Two Figures, Agave, Pentheus, before we talk about how her work traces ideas of Asianness, ancient and modern. Before those interviews, let me introduce you to the Bacchae. This is an extraordinary and really devastating play. As I said, it's about the dangers of defying a divinity. It's also a play about theatre. It brings Dionysus, god of theatre, on stage, and he acts as the director of his own drama. It is a play about the arrival from the East, from Asia, of a god who is also fundamentally Greek. And the Bacchae could be said to be a queer play about a god whose demonstrations of power are presented partly, it seems, in terms of transgressions of gender norms. But I'm getting ahead of myself. How about the plot? The play opens with Dionysus, disguised as a human, saying, "I have come to Thebes." He's ensured that all of Asia, that is Phrygia, Persia, Arabia, everything east of the Aegean Sea, basically, that all of Asia worships him. They dance in his honor. He's brought his Asian chorus of female followers with him. They're called Bacchantes, and they sing and dance a lot. More on that in my interview with Lucy. Now it's time for the Greeks, beginning with the Thebans. Dionysus has a close tie to this city. His father is Zeus, but his mother was Semele, Princess of Thebes, daughter of the former king, Cadmus, who's now an old man. Dionysus has made the women of Thebes wild. They've left their homes, they've gone to Mount Kithaeron in Dionysian frenzy, performing Dionysian rites. But Cadmus's grandson, Pentheus, who's now king, refuses to accept him as a god, refuses to worship him, and he must pay. Cadmus is still around, and he and the equally old Tiresias enter, ready to dance for Dionysus. Pentheus comes in, mocking them, and complaining about this stranger, this foreigner in town, who, of course, we know is Dionysus himself. And he's complaining about what this guy and his god are making all the women do. Here and throughout, Pentheus is convinced that this is all about sex, not about a real god. Tiresias does his best to persuade Pentheus to accept Dionysus, but to no avail. Pentheus wants the stranger stoned to death. The stranger is brought in, captured. Pentheus starts questioning him. becoming actually really fascinated by him, asking about his rights and his god. When the stranger, Dionysus, accuses Pentheus of impiety, the king is furious. "Tie him up!" Dionysus warns him, "You do not know who you are." Pentheus naively just says, "Well, I'm the son of Agave and Echion." But Dionysus says, "No, your name means sorrow, pain, Penthos." Pentheus has him shut up in the stables. That doesn't go well. The chorus sing one of their many songs about and for the god, and then they and Dionysus perform the so-called earthquake scene, making the palace tremble and burn. Pentheus rushes in. The stranger's escaped. He finds him right there, but still he refuses to believe that a divinity is at work. Then the messenger enters. He reports on what the women of the city have been doing, led by Agave, Pentheus's mother, and that means Cadmus's daughter, also Semele's sister. The women have abandoned their children and they're living out on the mountainside. Dionysus has made wine, milk, honey flow for them. They perform Bacchic rites. They hold thursoi, ritual staffs, fennel stalks with pine cones at the top. Those are the thursoi. But these women are also violent. He and his fellow shepherds only narrowly escaped when the women spotted them. And then the women tore whole cows apart, and now they've been attacking villages. The messenger concludes, better honor Dionysus, he's definitely a god. But still, Pentheus refuses. Dionysus, the stranger, gives Pentheus one more chance, but the king calls for weapons and tells him to be quiet. And here is the turning point. Wait, Dionysus tells him. Do you want to see the woman on the mountainside? Pentheus really does. And now he starts to submit entirely to Dionysus's power. Dionysus tells him to disguise himself as a woman and go spy on his mother and aunts. Off Pentheus goes, and he comes back in, dressed in woman's clothes and with a thyrsus. Dionysus arranges his costume just so and sends him off. After the chorus sings, the second messenger enters to tell us about Pentheus's grisly end. He climbed a tree to spy on the woman, but they caught sight of him, and they managed eventually to uproot the tree. They grabbed hold of him then. He called out to his mother, "It's me, Pentheus." But she and the other women thought he was a lion instead, and they tore him apart, limb from limb. And now, the messenger says, Agave, the mother, is coming. She thinks she's fixed the lion's head to the top of her thyrsus, but actually it's the head of her son. In comes Agave with her awful thyrsus. And then Cadmus, her father, Pentheus's grandfather, enters with the bits of Pentheus's body he's managed to gather together. Agave still thinks she's holding a lion's head and is joyful at her successful hunt. But then Cadmus brings her out of her delirium and makes her see. She's holding the head of her son, not of a lion, her son, whom she herself killed. We don't have all of the ending of the play, but Dionysus appears, no longer in disguise, a deus ex machina in the play he's engineered from the start. Cadmus must leave, Agave is to go into exile too, but Dionysus's cult is now established in Thebes. As I said, this play is devastating, though there is actually humour, however painful, in it too. Time now to turn to my conversation with Lucy Jackson so that we can think about what's going on in the Bacchae in more detail. I'm joined by Dr. Lucy Jackson, Associate Professor at Durham University. Lucy is an expert on ancient Greek drama, especially tragedy, and on choral performance, choral culture more broadly. These interests really came together in her 2019 book, The Chorus of Drama in the 4th Century BCE, which came out with Oxford University Press. Lucy is also an expert on modern and early modern receptions of Greek drama, and she has worked closely with the National Theatre in London on bringing their various stagings of ancient plays to a wide range of audiences, including, I believe, with an exhibition that she curated there that ended just last month. So she is really a perfect conversation partner for this series. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real treat always to talk about Greek tragedy, and especially with you, Naomi.
Likewise. Well, as you know, I've invited you on the podcast to talk about Euripides Bacchae. I have already given a brief introduction to this extraordinary and devastating tragedy, its plot, but also some of the remarkable things about it for us as a modern audience. So I've mentioned Dionysus is here on stage. There's a chorus that keeps on singing for him, about him. There's lots of meta theatre. There are interesting dynamics of gender. I've just provided a little taster of these things, but I'm hoping that you and I can explore them in a little bit more depth. So first, maybe we could think about Dionysus, that extraordinary, elusive god. I mean, well, one way of describing the Bacchae is as a play about Dionysus, essentially his epiphany to those within the play, his epiphany on stage for the audience. But how can we unpack that? I mean, who is Dionysus? Who is he in general? Who is he in this play?
He's certainly a god that crops up an awful lot in and around theatre. We remember, of course, that these plays were almost always, but not entirely always, almost always performed at a festival celebrating Dionysus alongside other rituals in honor of that god. So he certainly seems close to the general context and also the specific context of this play. It makes a lot of sense for him to be a god of theatre. I always imagined him as a kind of god of the in-between, a god of, to use a favoured word, once upon a time, liminality, that he really mixes stuff up. And that also makes him very difficult to define. It's often very easy to reach for these things. Well, he's the god of wine and he's the god of theatre. But what that actually means is a little bit more difficult, and I think it's meant to be difficult. In a way, that's his defining feature. We see a particular version of him in Euripides Bacchae, but another thing or important part of the context to bear in mind is that this is only one representation of a Dionysus. I was just thinking the other very famous version of a Dionysus is to be found in a comedy, a play by Aristophanes called The Frogs, where Dionysus also plays a very key role. And this play was first performed around exactly the same time as Euripides Bacchae. So you can have these two different versions. In Aristophanes' Frogs, he's a little bit more haphazard, a little bit more wayward, certainly treated with less solemnity and reverence than he is by the chorus in Euripides' play. So he's a real shapeshifter, I think. I suppose where he's from is crucial. His kind of backstory. The fact that he is from both here being home or Greece, and he's also from far away. He's come from Asia, is what the chorus of his followers say in the play. So he's from here and there. He's both on the stage and off the stage. Yeah, he's defined by being difficult to define, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. He's here and there. He's Greek and foreign. He's divine, but also bestial. And maybe in a minute we could talk about how in some ways he seems both male and female even. And yeah, you really get a sense of how he takes on multiple forms through the course of the play. Yes, that there's Dionysus there as the god, but he's also playing a human character. And then there are all these references to his becoming animals, like the chorus, right, at one point sings, well, appear as a bull, for example.
Yeah, he's not to be put in a box, is he?
No, no, not at all. I also really like this point that even at the time when this play is first produced, there is another Dionysus on stage in a comedy, though, of course, that comedy is also concerned with the nature of theatre. Frogs, we should explain to our listeners, Aristophanes' Frogs is a play that puts Aeschylus and Euripides as characters against each other, basically trying to decide who is the best. So a play very much concerned with the nature of theatre, the nature of tragedy above all. And then we have a version of that kind of exploration, I guess, in the Bacchae too, right?
Yeah. There's a theory, this may be spreading fake news, but there is a theory that I've always liked in a peer-reviewed journal, that actually this play was not first performed in Athens, but was actually made and created for a king in Macedonia. And in that sense, I've always had in the back of my mind that perhaps this is a play that's a kind of Dionysus 101 or a theatre 101, explaining what exactly are all of the key issues that are explored by Dionysus and theatre and how they overlap. I'm not entirely sure it's true, and I don't think we can actually know for certain, as with so much about ancient Greek tragedy. But I really like this idea that it might be specifically designed as an introduction to Dionysus. Certainly, I think the audiences in and around Athens, or certainly under Athenian cultural sway, would have already, by the time of this play, been very familiar with different Dionysuses. There is another comedy as well that features a Dionysus on stage that I've remembered, Crotinus's Dionys Alexandros, which again is kind of a bit of a taking a very famous episode from myth, the Judgment of Paris, when this seemingly humble shepherd is asked to judge a beauty contest between three stunning goddesses. And in Crotinus's comedy, he kind of imagines that it's actually Dionysus who's being asked to judge this contest, and it's Dionysus who fancies getting Helen for himself. But then, through various japes, Paris ends up taking her in his stead. And you kind of think there's a lot of comic potential then with this god. He's not someone who maybe takes himself too seriously until suddenly he does, as we see at the end of the play, in a really quite terrifying way.
Yeah.
So I think I'd be quite worried about having Dionysus at a dinner party of mine, or indeed going into a theatre space with Dionysus. I'd never be entirely sure if he was going to leap off the stage and come for me for laughing too hard or not laughing enough or something like that.
I love that, thinking about whether you'd want Dionysus as a dinner partner.
Oh boy.
Well, maybe I can pick up on for the rest of our conversation a couple of things that have already been alluded to. So one is Dionysus and theatre in general, and the other is, as you were saying, he seems maybe harmless in some ways or comical until he really is not. So that leads me to ask about the play's primary human character. Well, I mean, there are several human characters, but Pentheus. This is a play that's not just about the god Dionysus, but is also about Pentheus, this young king. We tend to forget, I think, that he's actually really young and still can be maybe shaped himself in certain ways. How should we understand Pentheus, who, of course, is the tearing apart of Pentheus is what you meant by this really devastating punishment that happens in this play, which shows you how you really shouldn't resist this god. How do we understand Pentheus? And maybe how do we understand that key moment in the play marked by just in Greek, right? When this character, this sort of seemingly hyper masculinized character who's been resisting the effeminate stranger switches, he succumbs, he dresses for Dionysus. What about Pentheus in this world of theatre, this world of Dionysus?
It's so brilliant how these two things overlap, isn't it? It's kind of galaxy brain stuff on the part of Euripides, how this act of being a man and dressing up as a woman marks a journey for Pentheus from being one thing, being man, only man, and insisting on that hard boundary, to accepting that a boundary might be crossed, that he might temporarily, innocently cross it by dressing as a woman, by inhabiting these female clothes. And for that moment also to be such a central part of what Greek tragedy, as it grew to be in Athens and around Athenian culture, which is, you wanted to see great male characters, of course, but this is one of the reasons why Greek tragedy does so well in the modern world as well. It's a genre that really does a lot of great female parts. It's about women, really. You could almost say, maybe I'd have a tough time making a case for Sophocles' Philoctetes being about women. But it is true that people keep on doing these plays now. People are drawn to these plays because of the female characters. And so the act of being a male actor, because of course we know that, as far as we know, all performers were always men. Women weren't allowed to perform on the stage. There is this central thing about being a man and dressing up in women's clothing, and that being something that was prized, valued. Particular actors and the way that they would perform an Electra, or, my favorite always, Clytemnestra. That would be the thing that you would really be thrilled to go and see in a theatre. So you mentioned this term meta-theatricality. Here, in that moment when Pentheus decides that he's going to dress up as a woman in order to see these magical rites, it's something religious for him. It's about letting go of hard boundaries and accepting a kind of Dionysian being on the border, being a boundary, crossing the border. But it's also about him becoming an actor. And that's exactly what he will be kind of play acting in that beautiful, funny, heartbreaking scene. Again, how Euripides manages to do it when he's in these female clothes and he's sweet. It's he's so very concerned about doing it right, about getting the drape of the skirt just right. He wants to be a good actor. He wants to be play his part well, as well as the thrill of inhabiting this other, of crossing the boundary, of leaving behind a sort of very definite box in which he's lived his life, or seems to want others to live their lives as well. So there's so many things happening just in that one moment, but it brings together this idea of religion, of sort of doing honor to Dionysus, doing honor to a plurality of experience, doing honor to theatre, that is just so beautifully economical. I know that we're sticking in the ancient world, but there was, in a recent production of the Bacchae that I saw, that was by no means my favourite, but it did really bring out the innocence of being a boy and dressing up in women's clothes, which I thought was really interesting and lovely, that there is play in there of just testing, of seeing. They kind of reimagined Pentheus and Dionysus as cousins, and they were just like they were suddenly boys again, like in raiding their mum's wardrobe. There's something very human in that, I think, as well, and that's why these plays have those kinds of moments throughout. But that I thought was something that really could travel quite well nowadays.
I like that. One production that I saw was over 10 years ago now at the Almeida Theatre in London with, it was Anne Carson's Bacchae, a translation version of the Bacchae with Ben Whishaw as Dionysus and Bertie Cavell as Pentheus. And there, Bertie Cavell as Pentheus went from being sort of the super hard man in a pinstripe suit to gradually being sort of more and more disheveled, and then putting on woman's clothes, which were clearly his mother's clothes. He was dressing up as his mother. But there were lots of really interesting things about that production, but it didn't get that kind of youth and that kind of innocence that you're talking about with this one, which I think is really important for kind of rejigging our idea of Pentheus. We like to think of him as this well-entrenched, established, often older king. And actually, he's pretty new to the throne and is more malleable, maybe, despite, or maybe it's a demonstration of that malleability that he comes on so strong and hard-lined to begin with.
Yeah, I remember that moment in the production you were talking about, and the clothes it was kind of reminiscent of Margaret Thatcher or the Queen or something. Yeah. It was like a very, very boxy jacket and a pleated skirt. But there was this moment when he kind of was jumping up and down in a circle, very much like he was playing. It was like he was singing, true. I think, at the same time.
That. Mm.
But I mean, the point that you make still holds true. It was Bertie Cavell. He was very much a grown man and kind of, built. And that moment of kind of release, but it was just a moment, wasn't it? It wasn't a sort of more thorough exploration of, youth and play. But that said, also, you say Pentheus is very young. I read something recently that said we're still teenagers basically until we're 32. So the idea of adolescence lasting a lot longer than has previously been thought, which again makes a lot of sense to me in ways that I need not disclose right now. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was still basically talking about theatricality or meta theatre, for want of a better word, with Pentheus putting on this role as an actor might put on a role, might play a part. So let's just think a little bit more about theatre, but theatre in terms of performance in this play, a play that's about theatrical performance. I'd love to know what parts of it you find most striking. You've already mentioned this moment, this beautiful, playful, and painful moment when Pentheus is adjusting his costume so that it's just right. But there are other aspects of staging in this play that are really interesting too. And I wondered, what are your favorites, or the ones that you find most intriguing?
There is a very definite moment that comes to mind for this, and it also is a reminder to me of how much we need contemporary reimaginings of these plays, particularly on stage. I'm always very, very keen to go and see how a new version of a play. And the moment that I'm talking about is when they have an earthquake on stage. Now, like I say, we don't know for definite an awful lot about how plays were staged, and they were probably staged in very different ways depending on where they were put on. Yes, there would be a huge amount of resource in the theatre of Dionysus in Athens, where plays were performed as part of the festival of Dionysus, but we also know that plays were performed at some different venues or smaller venues, and venues that might be just put together for a few days, or other stone theatres in and around Attica. So I think they would have had a choice as well about how do we create the impression of an earthquake. Initially, the image that came to my mind was it would all be a little bit like, those moments in Star Trek when the ship is going through some kind of turbulence and they all kind of hold on to something and it's all quite hammy. Perhaps the chorus doing that sort of stuff, flinging themselves on the ground, saying, "Oh my goodness, the earth is shaking," and then we're all there in the like a primary school show. But I am always interested in how different theatres create that moment, and I can't say I've ever seen one where I feel like they really cracked it. Sometimes they do something quite literal and they have what looks like a palace in the background, and then through stage wizardry they make it fall apart or something. Or it is something more elusive, like a change of lighting state or something. But I would be so fascinated, and actually I want to hear from you if you've ever seen the earthquake done in a particular way that made you think, oh yes, that's quite good, because it's a really funny moment, and so difficult because we only have the text to give us any pointers about what's actually going on stage.
Yeah, Absolutely. I think of this moment maybe alongside the end of Prometheus Bound, which I discussed briefly in a previous episode, in terms of how to stage a sort of an elemental event. And I've thought a lot about the role of the chorus and the chorus's song and dance and how they can generate that. I mean, the stamping of feet of 15 chorus members on stage, even just that can do a lot, right? In modern productions, I think it's lighting and sound effects that are the most common feature, but the role of the performers' bodies is really important. But of course, we just have the text. We have to sort of imagine, infer all of that. And that also might make us think just in general about the prominence of the chorus in this play when we're thinking about performance. There's as you know this better than anyone, there's a sort of old narrative that the chorus becomes less important in Greek tragedy. Over the course of the 5th century, we've got choruses dominating plays of Aeschylus, and then in Euripides, he likes his solo actors who can perform magnificent arias and doesn't want to use the chorus as much. And both you and I, in different ways, have attacked that narrative. And of course, the Bacchae is the wonderful example to use against it, right? Because this is quite a dominant chorus, an important chorus.
Very, very important, and something that we can only really get a glimpse of is the spectacular element they bring to the play. Of course, we don't know for definite, how the music sounded, and we don't really even know quite how the meter sounded. But the Bacchae really, they do a showcase of this particular kind of rhythm that they would sing some of the choral odes in, the dochmiac, which is this incredibly flexible set of rhythms. You can have, syncopation in there. It's actually it's one of my favorite things to do. A long time ago, I learned the 4th choral ode in this play in Greek, because if for nothing else, it really peps you up doing this like extremely syncopated bit of Greek. And they were able to bring these really exciting, rousing rhythms to the stage. This particular ode, the fourth ode that they sing, we know that Pentheus has just gone up to the mountain, and the chorus are there on stage. They crucially are different from the Bacchantes that have left Thebes and are on the mountain right there. They are there in the city, but they provide this kind of choral messenger speech before the messenger speech, where they outline exactly what's happening. There's this moment when they enact what Agave is doing. They say, who is that man? Who is that man who's up there? Surely he can't be a human. He must be a lion or something for have attempted this attack on us. And the chorus are all there. And then after this very lively set of rhythms, they bring it down into quite a slow and steady rhythm where they say, let justice come bearing a sword. Ito dika paneros. Ito dike poros poneo usalaimon diampax. Tonateon anamona dikone kionos gonon gegene. And it just like builds up, you just get a little flavor of how they're able to manipulate an audience with the rhythm alone. I say it's difficult to know. I deliver it in a way that I deliver it because that's how I was taught. But I know that others disagree in how we pronounce this dochmiac. But I think it sounds kind of cool, so I'm just going to go with it.
I think that's amazing. I should ask you my final question, but I will. I think it is important in this section just to mention that if we're discussing really extraordinary moments of theatre, of performance in this play, we have to mention the moment at the end when Agave appears with her son's head, which she thinks is the head of a lion. And that's also a moment that can be staged in different ways. She's holding this is like a thesis, but it's got what she thinks is the lion's head on it. What could actually be on it is potentially the mask that the actor playing Pentheus, who is also the actor playing Agave, would have been wearing, which then raises all of these fascinating questions about how far an audience is meant to recognize that the actor is switching from one role to another, male to female, and the role of masks in general, and sort of pointing to that. That could be, it's an entirely different conversation, but I'm also looking at the timer and know that I need to wrap up. So one of the things I've most enjoyed about our conversation is that we've been talking about modern adaptations or modern productions of this ancient play. But I would love to know if you have a particular favorite adaptation that you might be able to tell us about.
I do. And I knew of the existence of this play for a long time before I really clocked it. And I want to just shout out my good friend and colleague David Bullen at Royal Holloway for this, for acting as a kind of support group while I'm like, this play exists. This is amazing. So it's a version of this play that was written in the late 1960s, and it was performed in 1969 by a playwright called Maureen Duffy, and it's called Rights. And I love it, and I wish that it were available in published form. You can't get a copy of it. I read it when I visited the National Theatre Archive. But I'm hoping someone does produce a copy of it because it's so interesting, not least because you can put it alongside that much more famous late 1960s version of the Bacchae, the Shekner Dionysus in 69, which was performed in 1968. This Maureen Duffy's play, Rights, was performed in a studio setting in 1969, supported by the National Theatre, and it was directed first by none other than Joan Plowright, who we would recognise as an actor, but she actually directed. So we have a female-directed, female-authored version of a Greek tragedy supported by the National Theatre in the late 1960s. This alone is remarkable, especially considering we're still on only one non-male authored Greek tragedy on the National Theatre of the UK stages at the moment. But that's a different topic of conversation. Anyway, what is also lovely, maybe lovely is a terrible word, in fact, what is heart-wrenching about this reimagining of the Bacchae is it is set in a public loo, a women's public loo in the UK. And it imagines this space where women are like with each other. So we're kind of almost up the mountain, but it ends completely tragically at the end because of the way that the boundary of the female space is being policed. They, over the course of the play, various different unappealing aspects of femininity are showcased, which again I think is very modern, very much needed as well. And in the end, this is a spoiler, I'm afraid, so close your ears if you don't want to hear what happens at the end of Maureen Duffy's Rights. They discover a figure in one of the toilet stalls, and they believe that it is a male interloper, and they tear this person to pieces. But it actually transpires that it is in fact a woman, and they have tragically and crucially misgendered this person. I think we don't need to go too far into it, but certainly around current conversations about policing gendered spaces, this play has a lot to offer us, despite the fact that it was written, 50 odd years ago. My math is not good. Many decades ago. But it's such a wonderful example of how you can take an ancient play, absolutely turn it into something that is rooted in the here and now, but take those themes and ask a new question that is very germane to something that we're puzzling out now, without in any way disrespecting the original material, but really working with it collaboratively. And that's what I think this play does so wonderfully. If I have time, I know I've talked to her a lot, but there's one moment that I also want to, and it's from that Bacchae that you already mentioned, the one that was at the Almeida, directed by James MacDonald. I always remember the moment when the chorus first started chanting. They had a lot of song in that production, But what I loved was it was the first time I had seen a chorus of the Bacchae that wasn't in some way trying to be sexy or alluring. Now, I know that
Yes,
some
for sure.
academics do place a lot of emphasis on this. One, I shall leave him nameless, very senior academic, was like, that's the thing about the chorus. They need to be sexy in the Bacchae. And I couldn't disagree more. Find me the place in the text where it says that they need to be sexy, you old lech. But they weren't, they were totally in command of themselves in this production. And I remember the moment of silence, and then just you heard a fragment of a breath, and then they all began speaking in unison perfectly all together. And it was so self-possessed. It was so powerful. It was also very female. You know, there was a softness to it that I'd never seen before. And I admired it from a technical perspective. How on earth you managed to do that? Get everyone starting at the same time. But I really, really loved that. I loved that. I loved that chorus for that. And I always think about that, the power of this very controlled, quiet, but very potent way of beginning what it is to be a chorus. I love that moment.
I love that you mentioned that moment. Something to contrast it with might be that when Alan Cummings was Dionysus for was it National Theatre of Scotland. So he came in with his little golden kilt, and the chorus around him all dressed in sexy red garments. So it's a sort of an interesting contrast. That is fantastic. I've learned so much from you, Lucy, from this conversation, and enjoyed it so much. Thank you for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you very much for these questions and for creating this magical space to kind of ping pong back and forth between ancient and modern. It's such a lively, wonderful space to be. So thank you for including me.
Towards the end of our conversation, Lucy and I chatted about some modern theatrical productions and adaptations of the Bacchae. But now, let's turn to a contemporary art form we have not yet discussed on Ancient Greece Today, and that is poetry. Coming up, a reading by Monica Youn of her poem, A Study of Two Figures, Agave, Pentheus, first published in the Yale Review in 2020, and then as part of her 2023 collection, From. I am delighted to be joined by Monica Youn, who is a distinguished lawyer and a multi-award-winning poet and a professor of English at UC Irvine. In addition to publishing poems in many magazines and journals, she's authored 4 poetry collections: Barter in 2003, Ignatz 2010, Blackacre 2016, and From in 2023. And this last book, From, includes the poem we're discussing today, A Study of Two Figures, Agave, Pentheus. From was a finalist for the 2023 National Book Award for Poetry, one of the New York Times Book Review's Best Poetry Collections of 2023, and deemed one of the best books of the year by many outlets, including NPR and Time. Monica, thank you so much for joining me on Ancient Greece Today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So I was hoping we might begin with your reading this poem for us.
Of course. Yes. Should I just go ahead and start?
Please.
Study of Two Figures, Agave, Pentheus. And there's an epigraph from the play The Bacchae, which the poem kind of is in conversation with. Agave. Bacchae of Asia. Chorus. Tellus. Agave. I bring this sprig newly cut from the mountain. The hunting was good. Chorus. We see you and welcome you, fellow reveler. Agave. I caught it without traps or snares. It's a young cub, a mountain lion, as you can see. And that's from Robert Robertson's translation. 1. Agave fell in love with the sun. She spread open her smooth, hard limbs on the rocks and waited. She cleared her dusty throat, ahem. The sun kept staring west. She stared at the back of his blonde head. The sky, unblinking, stared. One day, she stretched upward suddenly like a geyser. She wanted to be a magnificent fountain for the sun, with dripping catch basins where he could slake his thirst. He must be thirsty, she thought. He has to drink sometime. She pulled moisture up from the ground. There was very little moisture in the ground. She had to pull hard, so hard the veins bulged out on her forearms and neck. She looked down at her body, splayed out on the rocks below. In her absence, her limbs had sprouted little black thorns in self-defense. The thorns all pointed inward toward a new hollow at her center. It looked like a ravenous mouth or a set of concentric mouths. She was trying too hard, she realized. She had climbed too far up. It was not sustainable. The sun kept marching west like a legionnaire. Okay, she said, fine, I'll have a son. 2. Agave had a son. They took a curving knife and cut him out of her. Her hollow center welled up with sweetness. The sweetness fermented stickily in the sun. A caterpillar drowned in it. His dying flavored the sweetness with soluble wings. Her son drank from the sweetness. She named him Sorrow. Why? People asked. She said she was at first going to name him Sparrow, eater of seeds, but then she realized her seeds were poison. People kept asking questions. She said it was an Asian thing, and then they stopped asking. Sorrow found the Asian thing embarrassing. Why does Grandpa have to dress like that? He asked about her immigrant father. Respect your elders, she told him. I'll show them respect when they show me respect, he said. That's not how it works, she said vaguely. Confucius. We're not that kind of Asian, said Sorrow. The scar where they had cut him from her healed into an ugly white lump. It looked like a white mask. Soon he was wearing it all the time. 3. Agave snuck into Sorrow's room to watch him sleep. She hadn't since he was a baby. Even while sleeping, he wore the mask. Under the mask, the honeyed sweetness was leaking out of him. The mask's eye slits oozed amber tears. They hardened into lenses. His hair on the pillow, a fan of tawny spikes. The rasp of his breath, he was sanding a surface smooth. The next morning, he poured his coffee into his gold-rimmed mouth, his gold-lensed eyes unblinking. How can you see wearing that ugly thing? She asked. I see things fine. I just see them differently from how you see them, he said. Agave dropped an extra cube of sugar in her tea. She stirred and stirred. 4. Agave's nephew was in town. She decided to visit her sisters. She loved her sisters. Together, they were aunties. They made a splendid dinner for their nephew and afterwards went dancing. Their nephew was drunk all the time, but at least he spent time with his aunties. Agave poured herself some wine. After her honey liquor, the taste was savory sour. She thought about the sun, how he had gone west without her. She thought about her son, how his lost sweetness stained the sheets. She poured herself some more wine. Mama juice, she called it. The aunties laughed. She started to sing a song. The song was very beautiful. It had a river in it and the moon and trees. The aunties joined in the chorus. It was loud like a lightning storm. There was a pale face in the tree. She thought it was the moon. She looked closer. It was fringed in yellow like sun-bleached grasses. Its cheeks rounded out like haunches ready to spring. Its tongue flowed out of its desert mouth like a red river. Lion, she yelled, pointing. The aunties yelled, lion. They all agreed.
Wow, thank you. It's incredible to hear it being read by you, having read it by myself. I wondered if maybe we could first talk about the place of this poem within From, and more broadly your use of Greco-Roman mythology in the book. Throughout, you engage deeply with this mythical tradition. We have Orpheus and Eurydice. We have Marsyas, the satyr, who's flayed alive. We have Ovid's portrayal of hunger. And you frame the whole collection with two particular figures side by side, Pasiphae from Colchis, wife of Minos, who mated with a bull by concealing herself in a hollow wooden cow, and Sado, the Korean crown prince from the 18th century, whose father starved him to death by concealing him in a rice chest. And in that opening piece, you talk about how Pasiphae and Sado set up are sort of containers, about how they set up containers which become at work, which are at work throughout the collection. Containers as Asianness and race, containers of desire, discomfort, and taboo. So I'd love to hear what brought you to draw on Greco-Roman stories, and then how this particular poem, Agave Pentheus, fits within that broader frame.
Yes, of course. I was interested throughout the book with the idea of Asianness as a container and with Western constructions of the Asian, which of course begin with the Greeks. I mean, the word Asia is a Greek word. It those places over there where we have colonies, and eventually began to spread so that, Asia now encompasses like 30% of the world's, surface area and probably 50% of its population. I mean, it makes no sense as a concept. And if you're an Asian American, the first thing you say to other Asian Americans is the term Asian American doesn't make any sense. I mean, what do I have in common with someone from Georgia or someone from, someone from India or someone from, it's just, it's a concept that was created in some ways by othering. And a lot of Greek mythology is obsessed with othering. Many of the figures that I look
Absolutely.
at in the book, Marsyas and Midas out of Phrygia, Pasiphae out of Colchis, I mean, they all are figures that would have been considered Asian by the Greeks. And they, and the Bacchae, Edward Said calls it, perhaps the most Asian of Greek plays. I mean, it's obsessed with Asianness. The number of times the word Asian is used, the number of times in which Dionysus is referred to as the Asian god, and the family of Cadmus, which includes Agave and Pentheus, is referred to as coming from Sidon, which is, would have been understood as Asian. It's kind of obsessed with this idea of immigration and kind of particularly religious mixing that comes in. And the way in which Dionysus becomes then incorporated into the Greek pantheon is something that I would love to learn a lot more about, actually.
And is incorporated as a thoroughly Greek god, and yet there are all of these stories obsessed, as you say, with his coming from elsewhere, along with some of his followers. Thank you. That's really interesting. One connection I was thinking of between the figures you begin the collection with, Pasiphae and Sado, is through their names. So most obviously through Pentheus's name, as you just read us, she named him Sorrow. And then as you write earlier, Sado's name can be translated as Think of Me in Sadness. And then there's Agave's Love of the Sun. Pasiphae's name, as you say, I'm quoting you, can be translated as I shine for all of you. How conscious was all of that? Was that a very deliberate connection there?
I mean, I think that the collection is more, genealogical. I mean, I think Pasiphae one of the daughters of the sun. So there's this kind of famous family of witches, which includes, Circe and Pasiphae, and I think Medea also comes from that lineage. And these are, the sort of witchy woman of Greek mythology. There's a sort of sexy, scary, magical, deadly woman. And so I think it's really interesting to understand these connections and and the Bacchae, of course, is a play that's as obsessed with gender and gender roles as it is with this idea of Asianness, and the way in which the cross-dressing and and mixing go back and forth between Greek and Asian, male and female is a fascinating power play.
Yes, it really is, and a very complicated one. Might you comment on your use of the mask in the poem? The theatrical mask of Greek theatre becomes a white mask that the son keeps wearing, although it's also Agave's C-section scar.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I delivered my own son via C-section, and he was about 4 years old when I was writing this, 4 to 5, and I was starting to think about raising him, and particularly raising him in a way that made him conscious of Asianness. And and I think it was, I can't remember exactly when I wrote this poem. I think I started thinking about it in 2018, but a lot of things happened in the interim. And I wrote the scar section the latest. In the meantime, Black Lives Matter had happened. This sort of anti-Asian backlash had happened. Kind of, signs saying "Stop Asian Hate" had gone up all over our neighborhood. And I was talking to Toby, my son, about what it meant to be Asian. And he said, "Well, why can't I just be white like Daddy? Why can't I be white like Teddy?" Teddy was his best friend, and he didn't understand Asianness except in the negative, and didn't understand, and there weren't any books that had particularly Asian little boy role models. There just weren't any. Um, so I was trying to, I was kind of imagining him as a teenager, kind of rejecting heritage, a bratty teenager, somewhat modeled on me when, I was 15. Oh, why do we have to eat this weird food? Why do we have to do these weird things? Why can't we be like everyone else? I was growing up as the only Asian kid in my school. And to think about, the royal family of Thebes as an immigrant family, recently immigrated from Asia, and having a son who is going to come into power in some way in Thebes was interesting to me. So I kind of projected some teenagerhood onto Pentheus there.
That's great. And also reminds us that Pentheus is, in fact, a very young man. His dogmatic stance goes hand in hand with his age in the play, even though we often want to think of him as a sort of fully grown older man.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about the chorus? The aunties of the chorus.
Yes.
How do you think of them in terms of their role within the poem?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that the chorus in the original, I think is, plays various roles. But I was most interested in, the aunties are kind of the stand-in for not only the chorus but the maenads, to have them be sort of a trope of Asianness. I think like many immigrant cultures, the word auntie in Korean, there's a word for it, and exactly what what people are talking about when they say, "Oh, you're an ajumma." There's a thing called like ajumma hair, right? Like, no, please don't give me ajumma hair. And so I was just thinking of how to kind of channel that sort of cultural pressure into, but in a way also a sense of cultural belonging, which Agave is able to sink into toward the end. And, it's in that frenzy of belonging that she kills her son.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Except here, of course, the poem builds to the moment of the play in the epigraph, a moment of misrecognition, when Agave sees her son as a lion, but we don't get the killing of the play. And Greek tragedy is often built around the moment of recognition, the recognition of another, recognition of the self. But here, what I love about this poem, many things I love, but one of the things I love is that we end with this misrecognition.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit when she sees her son as a lion and what that means.
I think to see him as a lion, he's the lion image in the poem is wearing this kind of white mask, kind of has these, this gold hair, this gold eyes. He's become white in ways. And the mother, the aunties, the previous culture just does not recognize him, thinks of him as, hostile, something to be avoided. And, this is again something that I think draws on my experience, going back to Korea for the first time as a teenager and just being told, like, oh, you're this terrible American. You don't have any respect for our traditions, you don't even know our traditions, you don't speak our language, sort of thing. But, something a little, I don't know, a little more damaging than that. We had, this is, of course, in the first Trump administration that this had that I was thinking about these things. And, one of the reasons I was so inclined to revisit Greek mythology, which I had loved as a kid, was because I was thinking, I was watching in real time um, the um, the nationalism of mythology. Like, we're building a myth of nationalism, and to see that function, and we were also building it out of othering. And to see that process so mirrored in these texts that I had loved as a child was really was fascinating to me.
Yes, and I like there how you also bring out the violence of the lion uh, image, and how jolting that can be when going back to a myth that one loves from childhood. I wonder if we could end with agave, but agave not just as agave with an uppercase A, but with a lowercase a. Um, the desert plant and her sweetness, the tequila that is made from her. I'd really love to hear about the mixing of the desert with Euripides' play, and maybe even also the liquids at work in the poem. How did you go about all of that?
Sure. I mean, I think when I first started drafting the poem, actually now I know where it was. I was in Marfa, Texas, at a residency. Marfa is about 50 miles from from the Mexican border, and you could see the border patrol balloons. And Marfa is a very interesting town. There's a very large art presence, and so everyone in town is either an artist or works for the border patrol. And
Wow.
the grocery store is really interesting. And so I'd sit there, looking out over my desert toward the border, and I was thinking about these questions of nationalization and immigration and fear. And someone was kind enough to explain the process for making, tequila and making mezcal. Um, we were surrounded, these agave plants were everywhere, and they were kind of fascinating because they will just shoot up these massively tall stalks, 10-foot high stalks, out of this, relatively, you know, short, spiky plant, just once in a while. And it's just like they're giving it, it's such an extreme and extravagant gesture. At which point I think, you know, uh, the heart is ready to be cut out of them. So I was kind of thinking about the symbolism of that, and, agave the plant and agave the person, and how what a funny coincidence it is that they share the same name. Um, and yeah, um, kind of mixed into this desert landscape and this idea of, clearly there are a lot of feels were sort of mixed up in writing this poem for me. And also this idea that agave is in love with this idea of, whiteness, of Greekness, of assimilation, at the beginning of the poem. How do the liquids fit into it? I hadn't really thought specifically about the liquids. I guess there's a fountain. There's a way in which she's conserving everything of herself to offer it outward, either to a lover or to a son. And that's kind of that's sort of the core of her, the liquid that her heart turns into. But then there's the liquid of culture, right? The wine, Dionysus's wine, and how that's kind of a communal experience, an experience again of cultural belonging.
And coffee and tea as well,
I
sweetened
guess,
tea.
yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, that's just caffeine,
Yeah. Um, that that nicely brings us to a close, and I guess the final thing I just wanted to say is that I really appreciate the register of the poem in that there is, and we've talked about some very serious topics, but there is also comedy in it, and that seems to really capture an essential element of Euripides' play as well, which very much crosses any ideas of a fixed genre when it comes to tragedy, with its incorporation of laughter throughout.
It reminds me a little bit of, contemporary, like well-made contemporary horror films in that way. Like,
Yeah.
there is definitely the horror present in the Bacchae, but there's also, there are moments in which you have to have some relief, and there are moments in which you have to, just take stock a little bit. It's not, an endless gore fest.
Right, but then is all the more powerful for it. Yeah. Thank you so very much for talking about this work with me. I really appreciate everything you've said and your time.
Thank you. This has been so much fun.
I hope you enjoyed the 2 interviews in today's episode as much as I did. With Lucy, I delved into the question, who is Dionysus? And explored what he does in this play, and the questions to do with theatre and gender that he brings with him. Thanks to Monica, I've begun to think much more deeply about the Bacchae's emphasis on Asia and what that means, what that can come to mean. In her poem, we saw how a passage from this play opens an exploration into motherhood and assimilation. There are just 2 more episodes on this first season of Ancient Greece Today, both of them different from the rest. The next one, episode 8, is about Euripides' Trojan Woman, and it will be a recording of a live panel discussion with Ella Hasselzwert, Assistant Professor of Classics at UCLA, and Rosanna Bruno, artist and illustrator of The Trojan Woman, a comic, a collaboration with Anne Carson. The novelist Ferdia Lennon was going to join us for that discussion. In the end, I had to speak with him separately. My interview with him about his best-selling book, Glorious Exploits, and how it combines both tragedy and comedy, will come out as a bonus episode at the end of the season. You can find more information about these episodes and all the others at podcast.chs.harvard.edu.